On this week's episode of Word on the Snakevine, we have...
Hello? Well, that cut off very abruptly. I want to hear about Nardarians.
And also some of this.
The name opisthoglyphous, so opisto back, or rear, glyph fan.
And a whole load of this. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Word on the Snakevine.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Word on the Snakevine. I'm Ross Deacon and we are here to talk to you today about venomous research, snakebite initiatives and venomous animal conservation going on all the way around the world. Today I have joining me...
Hi, I'm Ed.
And today we are going to talk about opisthoglyphous snakes, and we have a special guest on the show, Squirl Robinson, or also known as Philip Robinson, depending on who you are. Hi, Squirrel. How's it going?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It'll be better once we've finished this, I think, today.
Again.
Preamble's gone by anything to go by. This may, this may be either full of rants or full of lots of information. Hopefully, it's the latter one of that. So today we have Squirrel joining us. He is doing a master's in research in toxinology. So, Squirrel, can you talk us through a little bit more about what kind of research you're doing and what in toxinology you're actually studying?
My research is in Cnidarian venoms. So Cnidarians are a phylum of invertebrate which includes corals, sea anemones, and jellyfish. So they've shown quite a lot of promise in biomedical science as far as medications for cancer and pain therapy, things like that. So that's obviously a bonus because that's a lot of the focus that venom research is getting in some respects now. The issue with them is that they're quite a difficult thing to get samples from, obviously living in water. Some of the kind of past research and extraction techniques involved tissue sampling, like actually removing tissue and destruction of tissue to get the venom out. So my research basically it's kind of got three stages to it. The first stage is that I've developed an extraction tool, which I can't really talk too much about because we're thinking about patent for it. So hopefully, that'll kind of go through because it's a novel extraction tool. It's something completely different to any other extraction method that's been used before. It's completely non-invasive, and hopefully, all being well, it should allow for in situ extractions, so it can be used, in the wild, which obviously massively expands the array of species that can be sampled. The second section of the research is going to be based around kind of categorizing the venoms and seeing what the components are, and then assessing their action of the components. Another kind of subsection to that is hopefully doing some PCR, some genetic work, so we can hopefully use the venom as a taxonomic tool to see if there's implications in that between coral species. And then
Can I
just
get you to just explain what PCR is, please? Because I've never even heard that phrase before. So
right, okay, so that's a polymerase chain reaction. So basically, anytime something's getting done genetic-wise, DNA sampling, it's done with PCRs. It's where they're breaking down the molecules, and then they're essentially putting an amplifier on it and expanding a certain section of the gene so that it can be recognized. So it's kind of how they do things like sexing and molecular examination of species,
Okay. Oh, that
things
makes
like that.
yeah, I get it now. Yeah, sorry, I'm having a bit of a, as you've probably guessed from the intro to this, I'm having a bit of a brain fart night tonight, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah. So you were saying your third part of after that, you've got your third part of your research.
Yeah, so that is basically attempting to examine the potential for biomedical sciences with biomedical applications of the toxins. So, you know, seeing if there's potential for cancer drugs, pain therapy, that kind of thing. The general trend, like I said, with a lot of venoms, is going towards that. The medication side of things. So it'd be good to see what the implications are with nadarian toxins, basically. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Sorry, I was on mute then. I was actually talking. I was like, you can't hear me. I was on mute. Really having a bad night, it seems. So yeah, that's really cool. It's as you say, it's kind of, and also with where you work, it kind of ties in hand in kind of your everyday job as well as your research masters. Obviously, which obviously going to help massively.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the senior aquarist at Public Aquarium. So my research has kind of been done mostly at work, with some of the nadarians that we have there, but I do hope to take it out into the field on the East Coast, somewhere it's kind of rock pools in the North Sea, and just see if I can do some sampling of something like actinia, so kind of a native species of sea anemone that you'd find quite commonly in rock pools. So yeah, it's kind of mostly at work that I'll be doing the sampling.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Right, so now people kind of know one of the reasons why you've come onto this podcast to talk about opisthoglyphous or rear fang snakes. So in the UK, and I think across Europe even, we're seeing more and more bites by opisthoglyphous snakes that people are saying that they're having effectively bad reactions to, or they're allergic to, and there seems to be lots of common misconceptions with rear fang species and opisthoglyphous. So the whole idea of today's episode is that we're going to talk, and Squirrel's knows quite a lot more about the venoms and kind of the morphology and kind of the natural history of a lot more of these animals. So we kind of got Squirrel on today to kind of talk about that in a bit more detail. So I think the first place to start is, what is the difference between opisthoglyphous or rear fang snakes and other different types of venomous snakes?
So yeah, I mean, the dentition is obviously quite an obvious difference. So opisthoglyphous snakes obviously have that rear fang. It's not always as rear as it makes out, but the etymology of opisthoglyphous, or kind of what translates to, would be rear fang. So opisto usually means rear, glyphous translates to, which is why they're called rear fanged, even though sometimes they are quite far forward in the mouth. So the fang is a modified tooth on the maxilla. So it's larger than the surrounding teeth, and it has a channel or groove running down either the posterior or the back, or the anterior or the front side of it, which allows for venom to kind of seep into the bite site. In contrast to something like, you've got proteroglyphous snakes, which are your front fanged. So these are all urolapids, so cobras, taipans, sea snakes, that kind of thing. So pro means forward, or glyph means fang. So, as the name states, they have fangs set at the front of the maxilla, and the fang is larger than the surrounding teeth. And this fang tends to have quite a complete channel running through it, which allows venom to be kind of run through more effectively into the bite site. Which with opisthoglyphous bites, you might get some seepage and loss of the toxin, whereas proteroglyphous tends to be quite direct. And then the next one, selenoglyphous. So these are your vipers and crotalids. So yeah, vipers, rattlesnakes, that kind of thing. So selenoglyphous, I believe, translates to syringe fang or needle fang, something like that. And that kind of implies that the fang is like a needle. It's hollow in the inside, and venom can be injected completely through it. So with these guys, the maxilla is completely reduced, and the fang is the only single tooth that's found on there, and they've got quite a lot of cranial kinesis or movement between the bones in the skull. So it's almost hinged. So when their mouth's closed, the fang is actually swung backwards, and it runs parallel to the lower jaw. And as they open the mouth, that's when it kind of swings forward, and you get that wide, massive fang kind of gape that you see in a lot of pictures. So yeah, that's kind of one of the differences as far as the cranial morphology goes and dentition goes with them.
Yeah, and I think it's sorry. I think it's quite a common misconception. A lot of people always seem to shout the words that opisthoglyphous snakes are mid-fanged, but as you say, kind of opista means rear and glyphus means fang. So kind of the hints in the name really. Also, if people are still kind of struggling, obviously with the scientific terminology and stuff, I think a good way to describe it is in your car, you have rear seats and front seats. However, your rear seats aren't actually in the rear of your car; they're in the middle of your car. You've still got a boot behind them, and your rear wheels tend to be behind them as well. So, kind of, it doesn't always have to mean that they're as far back as possible. It just means that they are behind the things that are in the front, the fangs that are in the front, or they're in a position where they are rearward of a front fang, or of where, if that snake was a front fanged snake, where those teeth would naturally be on the maxilla. So as you say, it's kind of the hints in the name, but sometimes we just need a little bit more to do it. So obviously with rear fang snakes or opisthoglyphous snakes, they have a different style of delivery system, and as part of that, I will put up the diagram that which shows all the different fang types. So when you look at the difference between a lapid fangs or opisthoglyphous fangs or rear fang snake fangs, is you actually see that actually from a cross section they're very, very similar. They're both not completely closed tubes. They're effectively grooved teeth rather than a cylindrical, as you say, syringe fang, which you get on your viper with. I was about to say stenoglyphus then, but that's not right, is it?
Selenoglyphus.
Selenoglyphus. Oh, yeah. Well, check me out.
Nailed it.
So with a selenoglyphus fangs, obviously that translates through to syringe fang. They are completely closed with an opening at the end, whereas they're not with the other two fang types. They are like a groove. So so I think that's where a bit of a common misconception of that they have to chew to get the venom in, because the venom runs into the groove and then out the groove really easily. Yeah. But in reality, it doesn't. The way that the friction code, like the skin friction of the tooth, effectively keeps the keeps the fluid against the tooth rather than against the fang, rather than letting that fang move away. And it's all part and parcel of the different how they've evolved to be able to use this adaptation, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and I think from that, it kind of leads us on a little bit to kind of like, what are the different delivery systems? Obviously, we've got front fang snakes tend to have a venom gland, quite a large venom gland with a venom duct that connects it to the snakes. So can you talk us through a little bit more about the difference between each of the venomous snake types and the venom gland types?
So, obviously, we'll start with opisthoglyphous species. So, as you mentioned, there's this kind of idea that they need to chew to get the venom in, which isn't always the case. Just one single bite and there is venom delivery there. But I think where the idea that they need to chew comes from the fact that with your opisthoglyphous species, they've got what's called the Duvernay's gland, which is kind of their equivalent of the venom gland that you'd see with Selenoglyphous and Proteroglyphous species. So it's got a ligament attached to it, but it doesn't have any adductor muscles overlying that, which kind of the other species do, which can compress the gland. So there's no muscle to actually squeeze venom out of the gland. And what it does is relies on this ligament. So the ligament actually pulls tight alongside the gland and compresses it, and which is where the kind of venom injection comes from. So obviously that kind of chewing motion does help the ejection of venom from the gland. Sorry. So kind of in contrast to that, with your Selenoglyphous species, they've got quite a large venom gland. So as I've said, they've got quite a lot of cranial kinesis, a lot of movement in there, and that's because out of all the snakes, they tend to have the most reduction in kind of skull bone sizes. So they've got a lot of space to fit this venom gland in. The venom gland then has a primary duct which runs to an accessory organ. So your adductor muscles constrict the venom gland, and the venom runs through this duct into the accessory gland, and then it goes through the secondary duct and through the fangs. So the accessory gland, it tends to contain a lot of enzymes and a lot of serous fluid, which I think a lot of that could be almost like a catalyst to some of the components which are found within the venom gland. So once that's squeezed through there and it runs through there and out in through the fang into the bite site, that's where there's kind of mixing going on, which kind of starts to activate certain components. Or that's what I kind of believe to happen. And then, your last one, Proteroglyphous, quite similar to Selenoglyphous, but they do have a smaller gland. Although there are some species that have quite significant venom glands. These guys tend to have it smaller, and it works in a very similar way through the primary into the accessory gland, and then through the secondary duct out into the bite. So there are quite a lot of different muscles that between species, quite a lot of different muscle attachments and the orientations for the adductor muscles, but they all have a very, very similar kind of purpose, which is to inject venom, basically.
Okay, yeah. So they've all got very similar, very similar kind of delivery systems. It's just effectively how those delivery systems work.
Yes,
is the difference between them, and I think that kind of, as you say, that kind of maybe the lack of underlying muscle around the Duodenese gland. Duvenois gland. My brain is all over the place this evening. Is one of the reasons why this common misconception of as they have to chew to get the venom into you it has probably come about. And I think a lot of it is because a lot of people who own opisthoglyphous snakes, they own a lot of snakes that until recently maybe not necessarily classed as not necessarily classed as very as very toxic. So they have to have a high yield to have any effect. So people are like, oh, it's got to chew to envenomate me, but in reality of it is that it's not got to chew to envenomate you. It's just got to have a higher yield because the venom's not very toxic. So at the end of the day, a venomous snake is a venomous snake, and venom is venom. It doesn't really matter what the animal is, really.
I think that would be kind of contrasting though, in that rare fang species do have quite potent venom, but it is just the yield that is quite small in a lot of species compared to kind of the more kind of medically significant counterparts of vipers, elapids, that kind of thing. Yeah. So you do tend to find quite a small amount of venom per bite in comparison, which is why it could be that people aren't getting as significant, medically significant effects as regularly as something like a viper or an elapid.
Yeah, and I think one example of that is if you look at how much a vial of monovalent for boomslang is compared to the equivalent monovalent for or polyvalent for either an elapid species or a viper species, it's rather high because they have to go. They need the venom yield is so small on those, and it's so hard to get the venom that they end up having to put. Obviously, that translates through to the cost of the antivenom.
Yeah,
you still need it. If you get bitten by a boomslang, you're in a whole world of pain. And as we'we've released onto the page recently, is we've done a case study of the boomslang bite in Northern Cape that's happened recently. Ed, you may be able to explain it a little bit better of what happened in that bite, than I can.
Yeah, it was just an atypical bite. So typically, boomslang bites, the average time frame that's given is about 24 to 48 hours to administer antivenom. And it was a guy who'd been bitten on the hand, and they think it might have been 2 bites, which is why he had such severe symptoms, which would relate to the yield. And he just went downhill rapidly. The hospital was doing palliative treatment, just trying to keep him going until the antivenom could arrive. But unfortunately, he died within a few hours. Well, not a few hours. It was, I think it was about 8 hours. But it kind of threw all of the textbook on the few fatal recorded cases of boomslang bites we've got out the window, because suddenly something that you could have up to 2 days to give antivenom to was reduced to a few hours. And it might have been down to kind of complications with the bite, or the individual had susceptibility to the venom, or it could have been this second bite they found on the hand, which would relate to the yield. And the yield you get off opisthoglyphous snakes, I hate that word so much. The yield you get off rear fanged are so low that extracting them is so much work, it's almost not worth.
Oh, I think we've lost Ed.
Yeah, it dropped off for me.
No. Right.
Oh, we're back. Yeah. It's you tonight. Like, the listeners don't know this. It's actually the second time we've tried to record this. We did the whole episode, and then listening back as I was editing it, I literally just got my voice, some of Ed's, some of Squirrel's, then all of Squirrel, then none of me, and some of Ed, and then all of Ed, and none. It was just a bit of a nightmare. But we've learned a lesson. Don't record on a Friday evening. But
that was a very good lesson. No, this time I knocked my phone. So I got myself some new headphones.
Do they work?
They work now, but I can't touch the phone because the jack is a bit touchy. So I have to keep it in one very set position. I knocked the phone as I was talking, and I lost it. I had to reconnect, and then I could hear you guys saying you'd lost me. But we're all good now.
Yeah, we're all good. But as you were saying, as you say, the yields are so low and they're so hard to milk that it kind of people just don't bother. And then, like you say, for instance, at LSTM, you've got 3 boom slangs sat there that
we've got
you'd love
boom
nothing.
Slangs
3 boom slangs, yeah. You're going to sell them me eventually. But they're effectively useless to. They're surplus to your needs because
they don't need them. They're lovely things.
They're gorgeous, absolutely stunning. But you've got no use for them for the work that you're doing. They're no use really.
In the grand scheme of things, for the snakebite crisis, we've got a monovalent and a polyvalent antivenom for boom slangs. I think you can count on your fingers how many fatal bites there are recorded. So, in theory, we don't need boom slangs. Ours are from Tanzania, so they're a bit further up, which is a bit different from the typical kind of South African snakes you hear about. But to extract from them, they tried a few years back. I know Paul worked on them, and we had to look at different dishes, almost watch last dishes and all sorts. And the yields were just the difficulty to get the venom out. It just almost wasn't worth it. And now we don't really. I haven't seen them extracted from. We just kind of clean them out and look after them. And don't get me wrong, I love having them about because boom slangs are a fantastic snake. One of the first snakes I handled, which I don't recommend people doing either because they are quite a dangerous snake. But it would be a shame if we lost them. But yeah, they are almost surplus to use for us. I don't know if we'll try extracting in the future, but it takes different techniques from what we normally do. And when it's freeze dried, you have, I think, max a couple of maybe 2 or 3 milligrams, which it just isn't worth the effort effectively. So that's why Ross always wants them.
I constantly do ask for them, and next time I see Paul, I'm going to ask Paul for them.
Do you die a little inside every time Ed says that they're surplus to requirement, but they're keeping them?
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't even need to say anything.
Well, you know as much as anybody how long I've been after boom slang.
Yeah, man.
Like they are like one of my dream species. Like opisthoglyphous snakes for me have always been and always kind of one of my main interests.
Really?
You want to guess, would you?
I would never have guessed.
So anyway, before we start taking the mick out of each other a little bit more, so there's loads of different, as we're saying, there's loads of different myths on opisthoglyphous snakes, and one of the biggest things for me is it's like a bee sting, and kind of, and I know this is a bit of a bugbearer for you two as well. So, kind of, where do we think that this it's like a bee sting things come from? Because personally, I can't see it. But
so it is annoying, and it's not just with venomous snakes that this happens. This happens. I've heard people compare spider bites, scorpion stings, all sorts of stings. Tend to be kind of likened to it's just like a bee sting. And the only thing that I can think that's kind of causing people to say that is that bee stings tend to be kind of quite a common occurrence. Like, I don't know stats, I don't know kind of, this is just me kind of saying off the top of my head, but I'd say that bee stings might be one of the more common envenomations around the world. Because, I got stung loads when I was a kid. It's just one of those things. So for a lot of people, I guess it's kind of the only reference that they've got to an envenomation. So they're kind of likening it to that, but I mean, I don't know where it came from, and they're talking out their ass mostly with it because there's tens of thousands of species of bee around the world, and it's like a bee sting tends to be quite kind of ubiquitous with envenomations, with people saying it in the hobby. So that would lead me to believe that the kind of, someone in North America saying it's like a bee sting is definitely not talking about the same species of bee in the UK, which can have completely different venom makeup. So, you get, even within the same genus of bees, let's take Bombus, for instance, there's papers out there profiling the venoms of this genus, and there's such different kind of quantities of certain components within there that not even the same genus, like two quite closely related species, have the same venom. So it's kind of that you can't even liken a bee sting to a bee sting in some respects. And in some respects as well, it's kind of lazy, because if you look at the work that Justin Schmidt did, so I know we've spoke about him before, but if anyone isn't familiar, Justin Schmidt is an entomologist. It basically, I don't know if it was a master's or a PhD or what study it was, I can't remember, but he basically just took it upon himself to get stung by a bunch of insects, and then kind of rate the stings in kind of order of painfulness. But he described each sting in the same way that kind of like a wine connoisseur would describe drinking, kind of in this almost eccentric manner. So if he's going out there and describing all of these stings in this manner, it's kind of lazy for someone to just go, it's like a bee sting. Like, kind of at least have some imagination and liken it to something different. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of annoying.
Yeah, definitely is, and I think it's kind of lazy as well in a lot of ways. Like, but then you can kind of go back and kind of say, is it actually? People say that it's like a bee sting, A, because they don't know, or B, because it's easy to say it's like a bee sting than say, oh, if you get bitten, there's chances of X, Y, Z, and stuff. And the thing is, a lot of people a year die of bee stings. Like, not a lot of people a year die of a Western hognose bite. Obviously, we're getting more and more worse cases where people are getting different effects from them. But kind of, it just seems very lazy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the time, so you see it and hear it in shops. So I say reptile shops. I've heard people who work at the shops telling people that a hognose bite is just like a bee sting. And in the actual composition of so let's take honeybee, for instance, the composition of honeybee venom, because it's been quite well researched. It's got components in there that are very similar to kind of vipers and elapids. And there's certain things that colubrids, so your opisthoglyphous species, don't have that bees do. So if you're thinking about it in that respect, bee stings are actually more like, in a very, very kind of lame, clutching at straws way, are more like vipers and elapid venoms than they are colubrid venoms. So yeah, it's kind of, it's different. It's not something that can be compared. So yeah, it's a weird thing to compare.
Well, the thing is as well is that now we're finding out more and more and more about different colubrid venoms because they are very, very understudied compared to, compared to elapid and viper venoms, definitely.
Of course.
And we're finding out more and more and more and about some of the effects that some of these venoms have. Like, I think there's a paper Ed shared with me recently about Boiga venom, and hopefully we can get that up on the page, a bit of an overview on that up on the page very soon, probably after this is released actually. But they're seeing like the venoms of them, like there was I think it was saying that showing that it's a 3-finger toxin, so it's very similar to what some elapid venoms are like and stuff. Ed will be able to explain it a little bit better than I can, but yeah, we're finding out more and more and more about them all the time, and it's pretty mad what we still don't actually know about these things.
Yeah,
Most
definitely.
of the research is definitely focused on the snakes that kill people. And if you look in the grand scheme of things, when you look at your elapids that have been thoroughly studied, you've got your stuff like your cobras, your mambas, the stuff that kill people. All the focus is placed there because that's where we need to understand it. So use the example of a boomslang, which turns out to have an incredibly potent venom. But we didn't know that they were actually that dangerous until Carl Peterson,
1959 was it? Yeah,
until he got bitten and recorded his own death. And then suddenly it was like, well, this is a snake that's not really meant to do anything, and he's just written his own death because he didn't get any treatment.
It was a juvenile as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, wasn't it his own personal snake as well?
I think it possibly could have been, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
I know Robert Mertens with the Thelatonus, that was his pet.
Yeah, but that's
another kind of high-profile death from a seemingly kind of innocuous reef-fang species.
And this suddenly spurred a bit of research into, hang on, why did that happen? But when you've got stuff like your boiders and your hognoses, because there's not really a need to put the research in it, it's expensive, it's time-consuming, you need a facility to extract the venom, you need a facility to process the venom, you need a facility to run all the diagnostics on it, you need like your scientists to do all the research. It's an incredibly costly process to do, so why would you waste this money on effectively what we thought was insignificant venom?
Yeah,
this is the thing, is kind of what I think the focus is shifting, or will shift quite heavily over the coming years as we start to get control of if we ever get control of the snakebite crisis and find ways of antivenom production, of a more cost-effective antivenom, or a better antivenom than what we currently got, because obviously antivenom hasn't changed in 120 years.
Not yet.
But no, this is the thing, is once that changes, is that going to create a shift in looking at venoms from a survival standpoint to shift looking at different venoms from a biomedical standpoint? Obviously,
Squirrel mentioned earlier. He mentioned about how a lot of venom research is now in drug discovery.
Yeah,
because that's the next leap that we need to make. We need to find the latest painkiller. We need to find the latest antibiotics because of drug resistance. So as we've got a reason to spearhead new research, there will be new grants. There will be new opportunities opening up.
That's the key word there, isn't it? It's all about the money.
It's all about the money.
You can't do research on pure interest.
As much as it'd be lovely to turn around and just hope that we've got a cash flow that's never stopping, there's huge vaults under universities. If you've, I know that all three of us are involved or have been involved in universities, but if you're not, you won't really understand the whole emphasis on if the grant comes in, how much the grant is there. That's something that comes up constantly.
Yeah, I was very lucky with the research that I did at university. I was very lucky. I had the grant already sat behind me for the company I worked for when I did it and stuff like that. So I didn't feel necessarily the pinch that like you guys do at Liverpool, because obviously you're waiting for the grant, you're applying for the grant, you're having to write up all the application, then
my job is
you're waiting,
also funded by grants. So when my contract comes up to an end, there needs to be another grant secured for my salary effectively. So grants are such an important part, but you need to justify someone giving you the money. You can't just turn around saying, well, I want to look at this because I want to. You need to justify the research behind it.
And there needs to be an outcome from it as well.
Yeah, there always needs to be a value for money effectively. And there just isn't, well, there wasn't the money available to do this kind of research when there's more important things to look at. But
especially in your case right now.
Oh yeah, especially in our case.
What it is right now is that there is a worldwide health crisis in snake bite, and that's the main reason why we're doing this one of the main reasons why we're doing this podcast is that
the WHO elevating snake bite to a neglected tropical disease is probably the best thing for us, because then people will start, instead of us chasing money, we're hoping people will start offering us money. And I know it might sound a bit vain or something like that, but it's that idea that now we don't need to go and say, hey, you have that grant, well, do you want to fund us to do this research? They might turn to us and say, well, we've got this idea, can you work on it? And that would be the dream, that we don't chase the grants come to us, but that could be a long way off.
Well, I mean, now it has been kind of classified as kind of a neglected tropical disease. Hopefully it will start.
Yeah.
And it'll start to kind of...
the more awareness
I don't think it'll
well.
rival novel drug leads, but I think it'll start to kind of get towards almost as commonly researched as.
You could also tie the two in, though. That's one of the things that comes from it. So we can do a lot of research onto the venom and then publish the paper, and then that paper could be used further down the line by someone else to say, oh, look, we found these components. So we can then do a lot more collaboration, and that will open up more doorways as it does happen. But if we kind of go back to the Ray Morgan episode where he was saying, as the processes get cheaper and cheaper, we'll start seeing that people are just doing the research for the sake of it, because what might have cost tens of thousands of pounds 20 years ago could be £100 now. And it will get to the point that instead of targeting certain species or certain venoms because we have a need for it, it might turn around to be, well, why not? We'll run this test and see what happens. And then we start having to pick out the useful data from this huge pool of data. And if that happened, it'd be fantastic, because then we could start looking at these more, I don't want to say obscure venoms, but these rear fang venoms that we think are medically insignificant. There's no need to research them. We could start actually looking into them. And from the small bits of research we've got, the results are coming out where we're seeing components we never thought would be in there, or the venom is actually a hell of a lot more potent and dangerous than ever thought before. And the more this happens, the more the techniques are refined, the more money is available to do these tests, the more interest in it, the more we'll learn. And it might not always be for the benefit of the hobby, because we might find out that, hang on, that venom is actually likened to maybe a rattlesnake.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Further down the line, that could affect the hobby. But not in a negative way, because it's for the safety of the keepers. And that's something that needs to be highlighted, is that if there is new restrictions, it's not someone trying to take a snake away from you. So if we use an example of a false water cobra, because there's been quite a few bad bites from them, if they became DWA in the UK, for example, it's not trying to restrict people's access to them in, you're not allowed that snake. It's more, this is for your safety and everyone around you, because that venom has the potential. And like you said earlier, venom is venom. It doesn't matter if it's seen as mildly venomous or incredibly venomous. Venom is venom. And if you've got a reaction to that venom, it doesn't matter if it was from a hognose or from a mamba. Death is death. Like, complications are complications.
Well, this is something that the episode that's coming on after this one, we've already recorded with Scott Iper, and in that he actually talks about how some elapids nearly lost his life from a snake that was classed as medically insignificant in that region.
Snakes are kept in the hobby, the more people let bite them. Yeah, the more that they have an interaction with people, the more bites that happen, the more adverse effects we're going to see. And that could be one of the issues that's faced a lot of the research beforehand, is that you might have, say, a cohort of 100 bites, and if we compare boomslang, a mamba, and a hognose, I know they're not equal at all, but the boomslang, you might have a few handfuls of deaths, but it's treatable because we've got the monovalent antivenom. Mambas, you might have 100 bites, and out of that, you might have 60% fatality. Hognoses, you might have 100 bites, and we don't see anything. You expand that cohort, and suddenly say 1,000 people, then you might start seeing these pockets opening up where we've got complications, side effects, and potentially lethal effects. So the more popular they are, and the more people don't treat them with the respect they deserve, the more likely it is that we're going to have to study them, because we've seen things in the venom that what we hadn't thought was there. And that's when regulations come in.
Yeah, and I think that leads us on a little bit into another myth that's big in the hobby, or rife in the hobby, which is it's toxic saliva and not venom. And I know, Squirrel, you prepared a little bit about this, to talk about this in a little bit more depth, because again, it's another bit of a bugbearer.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where people pass it off, and again, almost like downplay the species that they're keeping, and try to pass it off as this kind of toxic saliva. But I mean, there can be toxic properties of both. So there's a paper by Hill and Mackesy, 2000, published in Toxicon. And there are a couple of good tables in there where basically in this paper they assessed the venom of 12 different colubrids, and the kind of profile it. And these two tables, they've got what the first table shows just the enzymatic activities of venoms. So there's certain components. So say, for instance, there is Boiga so in the venom, there's been shown no activity of phosphodiesterases, yet in the saliva, we have quite a lot of activity in comparison. And there's various species where there are more activity and more components, or some toxic components in the saliva that aren't found in the secretions from the Duvernay's gland. So, there can be both at the same time, but they've got a Duvernay's gland. We have found, a lot of different components of venom coming from this. It's not just toxic saliva. It is venom. It's got this duct, this gland, and it is, for all intents and purposes, a complete venom delivery system that works exactly the same as the other ones in a lot of respects of what it's going to do at the bite site and kind of the bite symptoms and signs from it. In this paper, they kind of assessed the saliva from Pituophis melanoleucus, just to kind of use that as an outgroup, and they found that there were a couple of toxic enzymes that you would find in venom of various species, and they actually found that in there. So there are kind of toxic components to saliva of some non-venomous snakes, but that doesn't make them venomous. It just means that there are these components there, and those, in the long run, could have been the components with their kind of opisthoglyphous counterparts that ended up in the Duvernay's gland. So yeah, that it's not a saliva.
It's got components in the saliva, but it doesn't mean those components are necessarily active on their own.
Yeah. So they needed to be recruited into the Duvernay's gland at some point through kind of the evolution of that to become a kind of a complete venom.
Yeah. And there's always a driver to. There's always a reason they're there. There needs to be a driver for that component to be there. Otherwise, it wouldn't, because it is costly to produce venom. So the PLA2s, like you said, in the saliva might not be active just in the saliva, or might not have much of an effect. But when you then add the venom to it, it might be a small amount of PLA2, but it might help the rest of the venom do something else effectively. I know that wasn't worded in the best way.
Well, so basically, if, say, for instance, the Pituophis, so they had phosphodiesterase in there. So phosphodiesterases cause hypertension and shock. So if they have that in there, say that this is a basal colubrid, we're not talking about Pituophis now, but a basal colubrid that has phosphodiesterase in there, even if there is a slight activity in the saliva when it bites its prey that has some of the effects that you would associate with phosphodiesterase, that's a fitness benefit. So that essentially means that snake's getting more food. It's kind of a bigger specimen, more likely to survive, more likely to reproduce. And then through kind of a succession of generations, this will be expanded on. And then obviously through mutations and then eventually neofunctionalization, a Duvernay's gland appears. So that would be, say, a salivatory gland, something like that. And there was these genes that kind of express that. And then one day, kind of a hatchling's born, and it's got this duplication. So instead of the one gene that does that, it's got two genes. Then through a period of time, that gene can either be lost, it could be staying there doing the same thing, or there's a few outcomes, but one of the outcomes is neofunctionalization. So this gene will actually evolve to do something completely different, which in this case is express something, a part of the Duvernay's gland, a part of the venom, something like that. So over a period of time, these things can happen if they have the driver, as you mentioned. They need to have the driver to do that. So everything in evolution has got kind of the four F's. Yeah. So feeding, fighting, fleeing, or fornicating. All of those four things are kind of the underpinning drivers of evolution. So all of these things are related to feeding, and it's been kind of published that venom and venom delivery systems evolve at quite a rapid rate, obviously through dietary shifts and things like that.
There's races. Well, there's the Sisterus paper that's come out recently that shows that even within the same species, in the same population, due to dietary requirements, you've actually got a shift in venom towards the dietary route, the dietary of the diet of the snake, preferences of that snake, and that's come out recently. That's a big change.
that was a big change, definitely. But it does lead on to the point that when we don't really see reactions from certain venoms, we've also got to remember that we aren't the food. We aren't the prey that this animal's going for.
Yeah, definitely.
But also with that is what you can take from that, as you say, you could change from a dietary standpoint or whatever. A lot of these snakes in the wild are more likely to take reptilian and amphibian based prey items.
Yeah.
Very rarely take rodent based prey items. Then when they come into captivity, after the first generation, we start feeding more and more and more rodent prey to these snakes. Western hognose, great example, devout amphibian feeder in the wilds. In captivity, they're all fed rodents. So why would the venom that they possess not change and not develop towards a rodent or a mammalian-based prey?
Well, I think because it doesn't need to subdue that prey, that there's no kind of driver there. It's just already dead. That's getting fed to it. So there's nothing to kind of.
But that's in the UK.
You're right.
In other countries, there is more of a trend to feed live than there is to feed frozen thawed. It's just our rules and regulations and laws in the UK state that we are not meant to. It's a very grey, fuzzy area that we don't really need to go into. So in the UK, we tend to feed frozen forward, but in Europe and in the States and stuff, there is still a high percentage of people that are feeding live prey, and a lot of these animals have come captive bred originally from years and years and years and years and years of captive breeding in the US. So why hasn't there been that shift? And why isn't that shift still happening? And why are we? Could that be why we're seeing more and more adverse reactions? Because actually, the venom has started to shift towards a mammalian prey from an amphibian prey, and there's loads of different kind of theories.
All of these theories, but you've also got to bring it back to the kind of the driver, the evolutionary selective breeding. We in the hobby tend to keep a lot of the clutches that are born. Most of them survive.
Yeah, that's one of the.
That's not meant to happen. It might sound a bit weird, but it's not meant to happen. A lot are meant to die out. That's why you have large clutches, because maybe out of 100, 5 are meant to make to adulthood, and those are meant to be the strongest, in theory. But we in the hobby have kind of taken that away, and we will allow snakes that wouldn't have escaped the egg to escape the egg because they've cut the egg open, something like that.
Yeah.
So we've taken out the evolutionary driver and have basically opened the door to any genes coming through. So you might have a snake that should have died. It shouldn't have made it past 2 weeks or something like that. That is now breeding, and I don't want to say messing up the gene pool, because it's not. It's different genes in the gene pool, but it's not then the selection of natural selection. It's not the fittest individual that then goes on to breed.
No, it's almost taking that all of it away from it. And obviously with a lot of things, like especially kind of how prevalent the morph side of things are, people are breeding selectively on kind of a phenotype or a genotype rather than just throwing hognose together. And I think that takes away some of the driver from the venom side of things as well. Because
it can then cause venom to change. So you might be mixing localities.
Yes, that is true.
One of the things that we avoid at LSTM is captive bred where possible, because we don't know what will happen if you start mixing localities together. Captive bred animals,
it's known that there is. Well, I think it's been proven that there can be a change in venom due to captive breeding anyway. From there can be, as you say, slightly different set of proteins and such forth in
and
captive
the
bred
percentage
snakes
of the proteins.
to wild caught specimens of the same species. So, it kind of is all of this driving that change in venom that's driving the difference in effects of people from 15 years ago to now.
There's a lot of different options that haven't really been explored, a lot of theories. Until we can prove it. But when you look at some of the prey for these rear-fanged species, so we'll use boiga. Now these are arboreal species, and their prey is probably, most likely birds.
Birds, yeah.
Which birds and humans or mammalian prey is not going to have the same effect. So that venom could easily overpower a bird, but it might not have an effect with us. And we've seen this in a range of species. Echis paradium leakii in Kenya are a good example, where certain parts of the country, they have a more insect-based diet, which when they bite humans is not much of an effect. It's still an envenomation, but not a deadly one. But you go to other areas where they've got a mammalian diet, and suddenly these bites are causing fatalities, and they're a serious event. So if we're not taking into account that the venom can be incredibly potent, but it's not designed for us, it doesn't mean it can't affect us, though. It just means that it might be less likely. So that's where the research comes into it, and we find out all the components of these venoms. And as Squirrel said earlier, like, you can liken them to other venoms or other genus that are rightly feared because it is a very dangerous venom. But just because it doesn't have we're not the selected prey item, we're not the targeted animal. It just doesn't have the same effect on us yet. And then as more people are bitten, we're more likely to see what actually happens.
We aren't a prey item for any of these things, so they don't have that kind of need for venom that kind of immobilizes us. It's just unlooking us, really. So, for instance, if you look at the Sydney funnel web spider, the males, specifically the males, have robust toxin, which is ridiculously kind of toxic to humans, but it's not across the board. Well, in fact, it's toxic to primates, full stop, but not specifically mammals. So if you injected that venom into a mouse, the mouse, I mean, it might have a headache or some kind of symptom going on, but that's about it. It would not die, whereas, a healthy adult human would potentially be in hospital from that quite quickly. So sometimes it's not due to kind of the evolution of the venom at all. It is just down to being unlucky in some respects, and that's kind of another aspect to it, other than kind of the dietary side of things.
Definitely, and that kind of leads on to the LD50 argument. A lot of people always use LD50s to rank most potent animals. Now,
it's all good if you're a bulb sea mouse.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're a white lab mouse, then you're not really ever into contact. These venoms should wipe you out easily. But then you use the example of the prairie rattlesnake and the prairie dog. These are a good example of kind of the prey predator battle that's constantly going on. If you take prairie dogs from where they are in contact with the prairie rattlesnake, they can recover a hell of a lot quicker. I think it's 2 or 3 days they can recover from a nasty bite, and it's not toxic. It doesn't kill them. But then you take a population where they're not in contact with that venom from that rattlesnake, and it could wipe them out very easily, or it could take them up to a month to recover. So using LD50, you're taking an animal that's never come into contact with this venom, injecting it with venom in various manners, and then seeing how many drop off.
Now, then you're comparing venoms that are designed, like for instance, as we were discussing with Scott, like Taipan venoms, which are purely designed to take
for
rodents out. Yeah, and so they're gonna score high on an LD50.
That's the issue. One of the issues with using LD50 as a kind of basis for scoring in some respects.
And it's the same with ED50, so efficiency dose of 50, which is used for various medications and antivenom. Now, when we're testing these antivenoms, we're looking how many white lab mice survive an envenomation with this venom and this antivenom. Now, that's all good if it works brilliantly in mice, but we're not mice.
Yeah.
It's this constant cycle of we can't use humans. There's obviously ethical reasons. You can't just start injecting people with venom. It's not going to be very nice for them. But we're equating different species that either shouldn't come into contact with that venom or that venom's targeted directly for them to then base what we know about it. So if you've got a potency chart from an LD50, that won't relate to the real world.
No, unless you're a white lab mouse.
Yeah. Unless you're a white lab mouse.
And then pay attention, because now we know what can kill you quick.
We've now got exactly how much is needed to kill you.
Yeah.
But then you can't read, so it's useless anyway.
So yeah.
So yeah, so it as you say, it's kind of. But then, where does some of these toxins and some of they're just not targeted for these things. Oh, have I just cut out?
Yeah, you went a bit of a robot like.
What did you hear? What didn't you hear?
The start. We had the start.
Basically all of it. That goes to show that some of these venoms from some of these opisthoglyphous snakes could actually be more dangerous than we think they are, purely because they don't feature on LD50s and stuff. And we have as a kind of, I don't know, it's maybe a little bit of a hang up on it, on that type of thing. And
but is that then a hang up of our obsession with the most deadly snakes?
Yeah,
is that something that we've got?
That's what a lot of people do, don't they? They get venomous snakes because they want a venomous snake. They want to say they've got a venomous snake. But what they do then is they go, what's the most venomous snake? So they go and get the most venomous snakes, the stuff that's high on this end of the list. Is there snakes that aren't at the top of this list that are as deadly or as dangerous for humans as ones that are on top of the list? More than likely, it's just that people aren't bitten by them because, as you say, the interaction with them's less.
Yes, yeah.
And as more people get them, more bites you're going to see, more effects you're going to see. And it's just a circle, isn't it? It's just the cycle.
It's a cycle. And I mean, the good example to highlight that is when we do tours on at LSTM, we'll typically start at, well, I mean, depends who the tour group is. We recently had Banger Herp Society up, and that's not a good one to start. Oh, so what's the deadliest snake? Because they kind of know about snakes.
Yeah.
But typically it's, so what's the most toxic snake in the world? And, you whip out your taipans. Then you ask them what's the deadliest snake in the world. And that distinction, you've got your taipan, but then the deadliest snake to man would be the sword-tailed viper, the echis.
Yeah.
And it's that distinction of we've got this obsession with potency, but potency doesn't equal fatalities. Potency doesn't equal interactions with humans. So
proximity.
And also,
proximity.
Proximity.
The proximity, and then also it doesn't. And as you say, toxicity doesn't. As you say, doesn't kind of take into the account that locality as well, because like the location of these snakes is massive. As we were talking about with Ray, it's poverty is what causes snakebite death.
Yeah,
it's not the snakebite; it's the poverty that's around it.
Which then is why sword-tailed vipers, they don't have the most potent venom, and it might take 2 or 3 days to kill you. But because they're affecting the poorest areas of the world, the poverty is what's driving the death. And then
there's no healthcare there to kind of help through it.
And you've got inland taipan as your other end of it in a country like Australia with fantastic antivenom, fantastic infrastructure, good knowledge, good education, money, simple things like that.
It lives so far away from human habituation that it's not as common to get bitten.
Exactly.
And it just inland taipan is meant to be the most toxic snake in the world, and there's never been a human fatality.
Which goes to show what education, money, everything can do for it.
And I think that's one of the things with opisthoglyphous snakes. It's only a matter of time before somebody gets seriously injured or maimed or dies from a snake that is all too common in the hobby because of the views and the kind of the myths and the misconceptions that are around them.
And it's also the disconnect of academia, what's common knowledge in academia, and the private hobby, which has been mentioned a few times before. But it's something that crops up consistently. Is there what could be common knowledge for people in academia is not filtered down easily, and it is something that will keep cropping up in every podcast, basically. But what we know, because of published papers, because of the understanding of venom compositions, won't filter down until much later on into hobby, and it's usually too late by that time.
Yeah.
So after there's restrictions put on them, then they'll turn around and go, well, yeah, it was known back, say, if it happens 10 years down the line, well, it was known back in 2018 that there was a recorded case of this from this bite. But that won't have been known in the hobby unless it's shared.
But then I think in some respects, you tend to see a lot of confirmation bias in the hobby, don't you? So
yes, you do. Yeah.
People, you get the people who kind of shout the loudest, so other people tend to take that as knowledge, and then if they are saying something such as "it's like a bee sting," and then someone else brings up and says, "Well, actually, I've got this paper. This is what I say." A lot of the time, you tend to find that person who's been told this scientific thing will go and they'll ask 5-6 other people the same question until 5-6 other people have said, "Oh no, it's just like a bee sting." So they're getting this kind of this confirmation that, oh no, what you thought was right, you don't have to change your way of thinking. And I think that's kind of a detriment as well. And that
it's easier not to change. Like, change needs some sort of effort, effectively, and it's easier not to put that effort in if say you ask 10 people and 2 people turn around and say, hang on, yeah, that is it is this, and then 8 other people say no. You've got your majority there, but it doesn't mean that the 8 other people know or have read specific things, have had
we've had it
training.
We've had it recently, haven't we, on Facebook posts in groups that we're all members of, and obviously people may think as three seem to tag team people on it maybe a little bit because we're all on the same side with this. We're all got different knowledge sets regarding opisthoglyphous snakes and venoms and such forth, but we still get where people are arguing points. Toxic saliva is the one that recently come to mind, and the people are arguing points, and then they're going to another Facebook group and going, "This person said this. I think it's this. Who is right?" Or they're going to somebody that they think has more knowledge or better knowledge and going, give me something to tell this person that they're wrong. And they're not taking in the evidence that's being given to them to actually understand, actually, maybe I'm in the wrong with this. And there's sometimes I'm in the wrong, sometimes you guys are in the wrong. But I think we're the type of people that if somebody gives us an argument, that is
if you give me a valid reason
I'm going to sit and read it.
My own view, I will then research that That's
Exactly.
where I see it.
It's
an argument,
being able to admit as well, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
being able to admit that you're wrong and you don't know everything.
if
And I
I'm
think
forming
that a
an
lot of
argument,
people
I'll
struggle
always
with-
make sure I'll go out and I'll check it before I start, just to make sure that before I start an argument and accuse someone of something, or it gets stupidly heated, that I actually am doing this for a valid reason. It's not just arguing for the sake of arguing and then not replying.
Yeah, and I think, and I think with opisthoglyphous snakes, I think it's more prevalent with opisthoglyphous snakes than it is with anything else, because of
But they're
these.
also more prevalent in, like, when you look at a venomous community as a whole. Typically, most of the venom is kept DWA, or in other countries with other licenses. But when you are dealing with some of the bigger snakes, stuff like your elapids, your vipers, that do kill people, you typically have more base knowledge because you need to be aware of what you're getting into. If you walk into a pet shop and buy a hognose and someone tells you it's like a bee sting, why are you going to go and research it anymore?
Well,
It's
yeah.
just-
You're going to believe what your perceived expert, who the person in
Yeah.
the shop is going to be perceived to be an expert to you, has just said. So why would you question that? It's
That's
like
the
if we were talking about Naya with Wolfgang, and he turned around to me and
Yeah.
said something, I'm going to just take it as gospel because
It's Wolfgang.
It's Wolfgang. No. But the thing is that pet shop owner or that person who's given that piece of information is their version of It could be their version of Wolfgang.
Yeah,
So-
definitely.
So they see them as the expert. They see them as the person with this set of knowledge. It doesn't matter if that person's knowledge is wrong. And how are they meant to know that person's knowledge is wrong?
They're in a position of responsibility.
Yeah,
So why question that
definitely.
position of responsibility? And I did it when I first got into keeping reptiles. So I started out on a corn snake that my friend gave me because she moved up to Aberdeen to go to university back when I lived down in Peterborough. So that's something like an 8-hour drive. She didn't want to move the snake. So that was fair enough. I took her on. And I've still got her, and she's a fantastic little corn snake. But I'd go into pet shops to discuss stuff with some of the people in the shop because I wasn't part of the reptile community. So for me, my port of information was talking to reptile shop owners and people who work there. And one of the standout moments for me was I went in and I was talking about looking at putting my corn snake onto a bioactive tank. I'd never done it. I'd seen some amazing looking tanks. I thought it'd be a fantastic idea. I loved the idea of naturalistic enclosures. So when I said that, he turned around and said, "Why do you want to do that? It's just a corn snake." And I left the shop thinking, well, yeah, actually, it's just a corn snake. My mentality's totally changed now. I mean, she is on a bioactive enclosure. I barely see her because she's buried or hiding somewhere. When I do, it gives me that extra bit of joy. But if I'd just taken at face value what was told to me in a shop, then my snake wouldn't be in the same enclosure she is. And it's a totally understandable reason to take this information from people in shops or people in a breeder, because they are effectively your port of information for this species that they're either selling to you or they're bred. But it doesn't always mean that their information is right or that their opinion on the subject is the only opinion. And that's something else that is quite big, that opinions might be different, but you can do things multiple ways. But it doesn't always mean that every way is right. It just means that it might have been successful or someone might have got lucky.
Yeah, definitely. And
Go on,
go on, Squirrel. Go on, Squirrel.
I was just going to say, I think that kind of that filtering through of it's just this kind of comes back to the venom side of things, where someone's like, it's just a hognose, it's just a false water cobra, it's just malpolon. It's one of those things where it might not be perceived as very toxic to a lot of people, but then if a bite does occur, you'll see a lot more people kind of being quite blasé about it, instead of like, I need to get this off now. It's just like, I'll get my film, I'll get my phone, I'll take pictures, I'll take videos. I'm not too...
Look, it's so cute. It's chewing on me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really cute. Oh, what's her name?
And in the case of some opisthoglyphous snakes that you've just mentioned, then they go blind and they're like, "Oh crap! I wish I never did that." So like it's a frame of mind that people just need to change. Like, yeah, it could just be a hognose. It could just be a false water cobra, but it could be just a Boiga dendrophila or something. But at the end of the day, they are.
I mean, I tend to think that Boiga, out of all of the kind of opisthoglyphous non kind of dangerous wild animals license kind of species, Boiga dendrophila tend to get the most respect because there's quite a lot of gnarly pictures out there that people have seen.
Well, there's Stuart. What's his name?
Stuart, you've just said.
No, I can't remember his surname. A guy in the UK. Yeah, a guy in the UK basically took a really bad Boiga dendrophila bite, and they still use the pictures to this day of it.
They could be the pictures I'm on about, to be honest.
Yeah, where his hand's basically black, like a balloon. Of black.
Yeah. Right up to kind of the shoulder height.
Yeah, all the way up. And he was in a serious way. And he was actually on the Venom interviews with it as well, and spoke on the Venom interviews about it as well. His name's really gonna bug me out. But anyway, but he took that bite, that dendrophila bite, and but you still seeing people on a regular basis. Like today, we were involved in a show you like a venomous snake thread or a venomous animal thread, and then halfway down there's a Taxihydrus, Taxidrius, Blandingi. Toxicodrius, that's it. Blandingi there, and it's in his hand. I'm just thinking to myself, like, that could be dangerous. That situation.
Unnecessary risks.
It's a massively unnecessary risk.
We should point out that we have already previously discussed it with the guy, and we sent him papers and stuff around it, and he's aware, and he now doesn't free handle it or
so
it is an old picture.
It is an old picture. To be fair to him, it is an old picture. Yeah. So like we have pointed that out, and he was really good with it, and he instantly just went, "Yeah, I did not realise that the venom on them was that bad." It takes, but again, unless it happens to somebody that they know or happens to them, they're not going to take it seriously in the way that
never given. I'd say the respect isn't given until it's taken. That's I'd say is the best way to do it. And the respect, when you're talking about venom in this kind of sense, when they take the respect that they deserve, it's usually because there are pictures circulating or stories circulating of really nasty bites that people are like, oh, it's just a hognose. Oh wait, here's a picture of someone who's taken nearly half a year to recover from a hognose bite. Oh, maybe I should be more careful.
Like, for instance, let's go back to the hognose, to the hognose bite that you're on about. There is somebody was bitten in France that they ended up with a low platelet count. I can't remember the proper term for that.
Squirrel will be able to knock it in. I can never pronounce it.
Thrombocytopenia.
Thrombocytopenia. Anyway, so they had a low platelet count, which is the first time it's been recorded in a Western hognose bite, and they took 150 days to recover from that bite. There was also somebody else on one of the forums who took a bad bite a couple of years ago and had quite serious nerve damage, and it has only just started to actually show the damage that bite did to him. Like with the scars from where he's had to have operations, where he's in hospital for days. Then there's been a few bits and pieces, but then people still are taking pictures of the snake chewing on the hand and being like, I'll name
it Chewy.
Sorry, my dogs have just gone absolutely nuts all of a sudden in the room that I'm in, so I'm just trying to kick them out. But then people are multitasking, not very good at that one. the people are still not taking them serious, and just like, hang on a minute, how much damage do people have to take before they start listening?
Gonna need to take a death before people realise is kind of how I see it.
This is the thing: is we're not saying that hog noses should be on DWA.
Oh no, not at all. They're fantastic little snakes.
They're great. We're just telling people that actually just
be
pay
a bit more careful.
Respectful.
Well, I mean, not just. It seems like we're picking on the hobby a little bit, but it's obviously massively prevalent there. But you see it with field hairpin as well. People kind of doing the same thing with hognose. You know, that kind of not taking any precaution to not be bit. And fair play, most of the time they're going to play dead. But that all it takes is one bite, and then you've got symptoms coming in.
I think we've lost Ross. Yeah, we've lost Ross, so I'll speak over him. Yeah, we definitely lost him. This is not us attacking the hobby at all. I mean, I brought my ex a hognose, and she loved it. And for me, it wasn't a snake I personally keep, but I can see why people have the attraction to them. But definitely, especially in hairpin as well. So there was a case in South Africa recently from a spotted harlequin snake, and he wrote up the bite he had, and this is a medically insignificant snake. That, I mean, when you look at the pictures, he didn't take his ring off and stuff like that, which is a big standout point. But we've got medically insignificant snake that no one really thought of. I think he free-handled it and then got tagged, and then I think it was something like 4 or 5 days for this bite to subside. And that's the thing, it's not just directly aimed at the hobby at all. The main thing is, even if it's mildly venomous, and you can't see my quotation marks, but mildly being the bit in quotation, is just because they say it's mildly venomous or prey-specific venom, it's still venom. No matter what you're doing, it's still a venomous animal. And it could just be that you are allergic to it.
There's that chance of anaphylaxis, isn't there? At the end of the day, if you get bitten by venom, you're allergic to it, you go into anaphylactic shock, you're dead in 15 minutes. Simple as that. And just because it hasn't happened to anybody else doesn't mean that it can't happen to you.
And this links back to the whole "it's like a bee sting." Now, I've never been stung by a bee, but my mum is deathly allergic. If she was stung by a bee, she most likely would die, or she'd go into anaphylaxis. So this idea of like a bee sting, well, if my mum was stung by a bee, she's in a very sorry state. So individually, I personally don't know if I'm allergic to venom. My first bite, touch wood, it's not going to happen, but with the amount I'm in contact with venomous snakes, you never know what will happen. But I am now playing a game where I do have on the back of my mind, my mum is allergic. What happens if I'm also allergic? Now, I haven't had any reactions, but I won't know until I'm bitten. So it's playing that kind of, it's playing Russian roulette sometimes. And that could be the same said about anyone in the hobby. You don't know how you'll react until you're reacting, and then it could be too late.
Yeah, definitely. It is and when you found out, there is a large chance that it's not going to be a fun experience.
No, definitely not. And it's definitely not something I'd ever want to be in a situation where, especially if I was in the field or I haven't got any protocols and I haven't looked at the nearest hospital, or I haven't worked out my safest route, my port of contact. Now, it might sound stupid to have a protocol for a hognose, but at the end of the day, a protocol is effectively you typing up, even if it's one A4 piece of paper, just saying, this is the snake, this is what's happened, this is what could have happened, call this number, let someone know, my nearest hospital is here. It doesn't have to be a full-blown protocol in the sense of for a taipan or a rattlesnake. But it's just the extra precautions because it is venomous, and you won't know the reaction until it could be too late. And if someone walks in and you're on the floor in the middle of anaphylaxis and they don't know why, you can't really be in the middle of anaphylaxis and explain that to a paramedic when your airways are shut.
Also,
exactly.
It is pretty mad, but at the same time, I do want to reiterate again, is that we're not trying to scare people with this at all.
Not at all.
Like, we're not trying to make people go, "Oh crap, I wish I never got it." We're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do is make people think, "Oh, I've got this snake. I love this snake. What can I do that could reduce the chances of me being bitten?" Is that getting a hook and using a hook instead? Yeah. Maybe. Is it wearing a pair of thick gloves? Maybe. Is it getting longer feeding tongs? It's just be sensible and think about what you're doing. Like, that's all this podcast is about, is to try and dispel those myths that are out there and just make people think that, oh, okay, I'm maybe doing this slightly. If I maybe doing this slightly differently could reduce that risk factor considerably, and then that could mean that I never get bitten by the snake, which then means if you're never bitten by the snake, you never find out if you're allergic to it. But also could mean that you're not going to have these adverse reactions that could end you in hospital or could end you with some form of debilitating change for either a set period of time or for life. You don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I'd never like to find out if I'm allergic to venom. In all honesty, I'd rather never know and never need to find out.
And reality of it is that in the job you do with the species you do, and then the number, an allergy reaction, an allergy to venom is an allergy to venom is quite high because of the species you work with.
Lots of spitting cobras and stuff, but we've taken special action. So we're lucky that we've got a facility that is built for it. So we've got air extraction. I think it's every 15 minutes. It's effectively clean air in the room. The whole air in the room has been replaced. No, you can't replicate. You can't replicate that in a home. It's too costly.
You can, because I have.
All right.
But then I put costs into it to be able to do it. So I've got a negative air pressure system in my room that effectively draws air out from the top and it pulls it in from the bottom. Same way as your vivarium works, but inside the room. So it draws venom. So in theory, it should draw airborne particles out of the room.
Ours is done by machine, though. Our whole facility is under a large air filtration system. So for us, it is the whole room is replaced every 15 minutes. I think it's 15 or 12. So
we're digressing anyway.
Yeah, this is digressing.
Opisthoglyphous to spitting cobra venom in the air.
Yeah, that did
not very opisthoglyphous.
No, not very at all. Not very at all. So, and I think we've covered. So we're an hour and 30, give or take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So I think we've got quite a lot of information, and we've covered a lot of information. So,
do you want a little summary?
Yeah, I was just about to say, Squirl, do you want to sort of kind of do a quick summary on kind of why opisthoglyphous snakes are called called rear fang snakes, and why they are rear fang snakes, kind of why it isn't like a bee sting, and kind of why it isn't toxic saliva. Just a quick couple of minute summary on that for us, please.
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot now. Right, so I don't want to go over stuff that I'd already gone through in the same words, but basically opisthoglyphous snakes are called opisthoglyphous snakes because the fang is set at the rear of the maxilla, and that gives the name opisthoglyphous. So opisto back or rear, glyph fang. So that's why they've got that. It is venom, and it's not saliva because they've got the Duvernay's gland. They've got this venom delivery system that you do not see in other species of colubrid that do have some components of some enzymatic components in their saliva. So yeah, it's definitely venom. They've got the delivery system. They've got the the gland. It's not like a bee sting because bees have got completely different, or mostly different, toxin makeup. They've got things in there that you don't find in snake venom. They've got melatonin, they've got mast cell degranulating peptides, which they cause degranulation of white blood cells through the release of histamines, which is one of the things that can lead to the anaphylactic shock quite quickly with kind of bee stings. They've got things like they inject histamine, they inject serotonin, things that you don't see in snake venoms. But there are some crossovers with certain components that they've got. But either way, it's not like a bee sting because bees have got different venom to snakes.
Yeah.
Done.
Done. That was really good, actually. That was a really good little summary. I might clip that up with the done, just so when somebody annoys me, we can just post it.
Do it.
So,
do it.
Quick. So go on then. So a quick one. What are your top 5 favourite opisthoglyphous snakes?
5.
Top 5.
Oh man.
We did 3 last time. I can't remember.
Yeah, we did.
We started off with top 1 and then top 2 and then top 3.
And top 15, I think it was by the end, wasn't it? But
Right.
okay.
Right. Shall we change it? Just to keep it tight in. What was your first snake?
What was my first snake?
Yeah,
It was
go
a
on.
checkered garter snake.
Yes.
The garter snake.
Yes.
There you go.
Checkered
Yes.
garter snake.
Everybody's gonna start saying garters now, aren't they? Because Ray Morgan said everybody in the US started with garters. Now anybody
big
who
names.
works in Venom's just gonna go, "What's your first snake?" Checkered garter.
It was legitimately a checkered garter, though. I'm not saying that because of Ray Morgan.
I've already
by the
shot
way-
myself in the foot talking about corn snakes. It was totally
Yeah,
a garter, actually. It wasn't a corn, it was a garter.
I've just got to say as well, you kind of threw me on the bus making me the following episode from Ray Morgan. I kind of feel like
fine.
that's kind of a downgrade.
Well, not really. 2 completely different sets. The thing is you are one of for me one of the the people in the hobby that's quite underrated from a hobby perspective. You go under the radar, you do your own thing, but your knowledge set is so vast, and it's so.
I tend not to go out there with the hobby. It kind of it annoys me a little bit in some respects. So I don't like to be around. But I'm not slating the hobby.
It's all you've done this episode, Squirrel, is just slate everybody. Slate the hobby. That's all you've done.
If someone's annoyed by what I've just said, I'm probably talking about them. I'm kidding. I love everyone.
We're gonna pull this back then. So your first snake was opisthoglyphous, actually, technically, but we won't go there. So go on then. So toxic saliva. So what is your Scott, and what are your favourite opisthoglyphous snakes?
Top 3.
Top 3. Let's keep it 3. All right. So we've got Boigodendrophila is the top one. I've always liked that.
Subspecies.
Yeah.
Which subspecies?
Do you
There's
have
about
anything
that. Yeah, it's
Right,
fair. Yeah.
Thanks, alright. We're giving him 3, and you're now diving into subspecies.
That's all right. I'd knocked that one out straight away.
Right, so Boiga.
Boigodendrophila gymnosynxa. Second, definitely Rhabdophis tigrinus.
Oh, I love Rhabdophis.
Yeah, I mean, nice snakes, really nice snakes. I like them a lot.
Same.
I think third, I would probably go for another Rhabdophis and say Subminiatus.
See, I do like them as well.
Yeah.
Like them. Go on then, Ed, because I've never asked you this question. What's your top 3?
Oh, God, why did you do that? Oh, God. I wasn't prepared for this. Oh.
Do you want me to say my 3 while you have a think about this?
Right, go for it.
So my 3, I think it's quite obvious. I think my favourite is.
Is he saying it?
Oh,
he said it.
Montepolanis. I just love them both. I just love Malpolon as a genus. which obviously goes into Regiris multilensis as well. I think they're just great. Everything about them is just great. Thelatornis Kirtlandy, massive soft spot after having the one that I had. I want more of them ASAP.
Got a good picture out of that one, though, don't we?
Got plenty of good pictures of that one. She was absolutely stunning thing. She was.
I meant the Duvenois gland, which ties in nicely with this episode.
Because when she passed, I obviously gave it to you, didn't I? To
for science.
The pelt for
science.
Pelt and to take the pictures of the glands and stuff and
for one of the British Science Festival.
Yeah, so she went to a good cause, so I was happy about that. And then third, it's got to be Boomslang. I do love them. I'm so desperate.
So predictable.
I know, I'm really predictable.
So predictable.
Go on then, Ed. Because Ed's one of Ed's gone 100%.
Well, I haven't had many experiences with Fanged. I'll put that out here, so it's not the most exciting list. Definitely Broomslang though, but I've got a special place in my heart because it was the third venomous snake I ever handled, and I'm sure Ross can, chime in with that one. His Broomslang obsession is different to mine. I've recently really fell in love with the Samophis. We've got to work a little. Samophis and
you're playing into Ross's hands.
I know.
Love Samophis. I was there when I was just about to say Boomslang. I was like, oh god, anything from Famophidae, I'm like,
yeah.
That's just
so we've got a little Sibilans at work, and
beautiful.
He's a fantastic snake. I really enjoy that snake. And then I don't really know now. I do really enjoy working with our Boyders. We've got Boyded Dendrophila, which I'm not really having an exciting list here, but the interactions I've had with them are fantastic. So I guess I'll add them. Yeah.
Nice.
Quickly on the Boyded Dendrophila, they are the least accurate striking snake I think I've
seen. That's fantastic.
They're hilarious. They literally just strike
open and just
anywhere but where you are. It's just like, hang on a minute.
They look almost surprised that they've missed you with their mouth open. And they're recording back like, I must have got him, hang on. And then they'll do it again. It's fantastic.
They are brilliant. Yeah, they're so fun. They're good to take pictures of because of that, though. So
yeah,
just fantastic. So, I'd like to say thank you to Squirl for this episode. I've really enjoyed recording this episode. It's been nice having a bit more of a relaxed episode than when we have a guest on that we're not overly au fait with. It's quite nice to have that relaxed chat about something that I've definitely got a massive interest in, and I know you have as well. So it's been nice to have that kind of flow of a chat instead of it being more of an interview based thing. So. Yeah. It's been a really good episode to record. Really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for coming on.
It's all good. Thanks for having me on.
Hopefully we'll get you back in future for bits and pieces. You'll probably end up as our venom specialist that we get you on now and again to cover bits and pieces for us that we're just a bit just a bit short of knowledge on. So I think
until someone like Wolfgang comes on and says, I don't know what he's on about.
Yeah, until that, you're safe for now.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to say thank you everybody for listening as well. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as we've enjoyed recording it, and hopefully everybody learned something from this, because again, loads of misconceptions that are in the hobby. Hopefully this can clear a few bits and pieces up for people, and we'll hopefully see you all again soon. Bye for now.
See you in a bit.